The paintwork is of good quality, due to which quite a few copies are presented on the secondary market is good for their age, cosmetic condition. There are no significant complaints about the iron body panels of the car. Despite the lack of galvanization, the metal from which they are made resists the onslaught of the red disease well. However, certain problems do exist. So, for example, the metal begins to bloom quite quickly in places where the paint is chipped. The hood and the edge of the roof of the car are considered especially vulnerable in this regard. The windshield frame and seals are much more prone to corrosion. They often rot from the inside. The latter are considered significant sore of this model, so you need to look after them carefully. Today it is difficult to find a car without signs of this trouble. When thresholds are restored, they are usually not completely changed, but patches are molded, leaving a rod inside the threshold, since it is quite problematic to cut them off entirely. Things are much worse with hidden areas of the body and the bottom. So, for example, in the absence of additional corrosions and blasting, moisture and chemicals eventually provoke the appearance of rust on the seams of the inside of the rear wheel arches. Formations operated with a high load on the suspension, the tightness of the seams from the inside of the front arches is broken, after which a rust appears on them. Over the years, many pockets of corrosion appear on the bottom of the car. However, in most cases, it is superficial and does not pose a big threat. The only thing that can rot through is the side of the trunk. Also, in the absence of proper care, rust can be found in hidden areas under bumpers, a niche under the windshield, around the antenna on the rear fender and seat mounting elements. Among other shortcomings, the flimsy mount of bumpers and fog lights can be noted. The windshield, which moreover painfully endures sudden changes in temperature, does not differ in resistance to external influences. It is overridden. It bursts when hot air blowing is turned on in an unheated car. Over time, a backlash may appear in the trapezoid of the wipers, which, if untimely eliminated, leads to the destruction of the hinges of the mechanism. After the washer fluid freezes in the system, there is a high probability of washer pump failure and leakage of the reservoir. Often the cable of the lock handle fails, it breaks, the lock itself and the door wiring. It is worth noting the weak protection of the engine compartment from dirt and moisture, the presence of which reduces the life of the power relay. The fuse box is leaky. The disadvantages include the rather weak light of the head optics. The line of the power units Kia Cerato consists of 3 gasoline engines and 1 diesel. Gasoline 1.6 G4ED 105 horsepower and G4FC 122 horsepower, 1.8 G4GB was installed an Asian version of the car, and 2.0 G4GC 137-140C IS. Turbo diesel 1.6 D4FB 115 horsepower. Looking ahead, I will say that gasoline engines do not have serious reliability problems. Of the characteristic ailments inherent in all units, one can single out the unreliability of the hoses and the radiator of the cooling system. They lose their tightness. On average, their service life is 5-6 years. Also, the modest resource of engine mounts, 100-150,000 kilometers, and attachments should be attributed to common problems. Bearings often fail at a run of 150-100,000 kilometers. The 1.6 engine is represented by 2 series of the old Alpha 2 and the newer Gamma installed in cars after restyling. The first, like other gasoline units, is equipped with a timing belt drive, which is supplemented by an intershaft short chain, 60,000 km belt resource, 300,000 plus kilometers chains, and hydraulic valve clearance compensators. The second gas distribution mechanism in the drive has a reliable metal chain, nursing to 300,000 km, but there are no hydraulic compensators. The main disadvantage of the G4ED engine is its excessive noise, a feature of the engine. Often the cause of noise is poorly functioning hydraulic lifters and an intershaft chain. Of the weak points, one can single out the unreliability of the ignition system, in the event of a malfunction of which jerks and jerks appear, as well as the tendency of the motor to oil consumption. The disease occurs after 100,000 km and progresses with increasing mileage. Another weak point is the fuel pump, which is located under the rear seats. It does not die immediately, but starts to supply fuel intermittently, especially if it overheats in the heat. Many owners first spend a lot of time and money on diagnostics, changing many related parts, before replacing a seemingly working gas pump. Of the little things, you can highlight the current valve cover gasket. The main problem of a 122 horsepower engine is the catalyst, which after 100,000 km begins to break down, while its particles enter the cylinders and significantly accelerated their wear. Also, weak points include valve cover and cylinder block gaskets, crankshaft and input shaft oil seals. They begin to flow closer to 150,000 km. Due to the fact that the engine does not have hydraulic lifters, it is necessary to adjust the valves every 80-100,000 km. It is not worth delaying this procedure, as this negatively affects the cylinder head resource. Among other troubles, floating idle speeds can be noted, to eliminate which, in addition to replacing candles and cleaning the throttle, it may be necessary to update the ECU software. The resource of the units is about 300,000 kilometers. Engine 1.8 and 2.0, although they belong to the Beta 2 series, have a similar design with the weakest 1.6-liter unit. A timing belt works in the timing drive, which is recommended to be changed along with the rollers at least once every 60,000 kilometers in order to avoid brake, bent valves, and other troubles. These motors do not have the most successful hydraulic belt tensioner. Because of this, during a cold start there is a risk of belt slippage, especially if the oil is at yield point. In addition, these engines are famous for their increased noise level, the presence of vibration, jerks, failures during acceleration, and unstable idling. Most troubles can be eliminated by replacing the spark plugs, explosive wires, and ignition coils. But the freezing of revolutions is eliminated only by the firmware. For cars with high mileage, there may be corrosion on the cast iron block, its bolts and studs, which can play a cruel joke when trying to repair the unit. The 1.6-liter diesel engine was intended for the European market and is not often found here. This unit is no less reliable than gasoline engines, but at the same time it has better dynamics and efficiency. The main problems with the motor, as a rule, are caused by untimely maintenance and the use of low-quality diesel fuel. So, for example, the use of potash fuel leads to accelerated wear of the nozzles and rapid contamination of the manifold, swirl flaps, and the EGR valve, manifested by a decrease in power and traction dips. With untimely maintenance, the service life of the timing chain is significantly reduced. It can stretch after 100–150,000 kilometers. Among the weak points of the engine, one can single out the unreliability of the boost sensor, or rather the contact in its wiring. If there is a problem at low speeds, the turbine makes a loud and unpleasant noise, and the fuel rail pressure regulator jerks appear during acceleration, stalls at idle. Often, the return pipe of the injectors are also let down. This malfunction is manifested by the presence of difficulties when starting a warm engine. The resource of the engine is 300–400,000 kilometers. Transmission. For Kia Cerato, 2 gearboxes were provided, a 5-speed mechanics and a 4-speed automatic. A common ailment of the transmission is the unreliability of the anthers of the drive shafts. If they are not followed up to 100–120,000 kilometers, the outer seat joint may make noise. With the timely change of anthers and renewal of lubrication, the shafts can withstand up to 200,000 kilometers. The weak points of the mechanical transmission include the release bearing, since its resource really exceeds 100,000 kilometers. Closer to 150,000 kilometers, the clutch master cylinder begins to flow. The original clutch, with adequate operation, can last 150–200,000 kilometers. For cars with a diesel engine, the clutch serves 100–150,000 kilometers. There are also complaints about the operation of the manual transmission lubrication system. The box itself painfully endures thought operation, slipping, shocks during switching, and heavy loads, trailer towing. In such cases, as a rule, bearings, differential, synchronizers, and other elements fail. Among other troubles, one can single out the presence of problems with oil seals, flow. The automatic transmission has proven to be more reliable than the mechanics. With timely maintenance, oil change every 60,000 kilometers, and careful operation, this transmission can last up to 300,000 kilometers without repair. Repair of this automatic transmission is not difficult and relatively inexpensive, $400–500. With a rare maintenance, the first repair is required closer to 150,000 kilometers. The valve body solenoids, the direct drum caliper, the brake band, bushings, and the overdrive drum thrust bearing will have to be replaced. Those who like to arrange races at traffic lights at the same run need to replace the lining of the gas turbine engine. Reliability of the suspension, steering, and brakes of the Kia Cerato. The Kia Cerato of the first generation uses an independent suspension design with anti-roll bars, on the front axle McPherson, on the rear multi-link. The chassis of the car is quite reliable, simple, and inexpensive to repair. In good condition, the suspension has a good level of comfort. But the behavior of the car on the road can be criticized. The body rolls on sharp turns. The main disadvantage of the chassis is its noise. Even slight wear of parts is almost always accompanied by the presence of extraneous sounds. Of the weak points, in addition to bushings and stabilizer struts, one can single out not very strong front wheel bearings and front strut supports. As a rule, their resource does not exceed 100,000 kilometers. If you do not slow down on broken selection of the road and overload the car, the shock absorbers will give up pretty quickly, and the rear springs may also need to be replaced. They break. With careful handling, shock absorbers can last about 150,000 kilometers. The ball bearings and silent blocks of the front levers serve about the same amount. Rear suspension consumables with moderate loads can withstand 100–150,000 kilometers. Wheel bearings can last up to 200,000 kilometers. They change as an assembly with the hub. The steering system is endowed with a rack and pinion mechanism with hydraulic booster. The rail turned out to be quite reliable and in most cases does not cause problems for 200–250,000 kilometers. The only weak point here is the power steering, which painfully endures work with a low fluid level. It starts to howl. The reason for the decrease in the power steering fluid may be leakage of the ailments of the hydraulic system, radiator, high-pressure hoses. Steering consumables also have an acceptable resource. Tire ends travel 100–150,000 kilometers, thrust up to 200,000 kilometers. When using large diameter wheels, their resource is reduced. There are no particular complaints about the reliability of the braking system. The main troubles are associated with the ABS block, the engine rusts, and ABS sensor fail by 150–200,000 kilometers. It is worth noting the tendency to corrosion of the brake lines. During operation, attention should be paid to the caliper guides. When replacing the pads, it is recommended to lubricate them, otherwise they begin to knock unpleasantly. Selling. Given the class and cost of this car, we can note the good quality of finishing materials and interior assembly, as well as the pleasant interior design that has retained its relevance even after so many years. Of the weak points here, it is worth highlighting the mediocre wear resistance of the steering wheel sheath needs restoration after 100–150,000 kilometers, and the poor quality of the front seat filler. It quickly loses its shape, especially if the car is operated by a heavy driver. Quite problematic is the seat upholstery made of eco leather. It wears out quickly. As for the interior equipment, the unreliability of the climate system can be noted here. The stove radiator and the fan motor fail. It is worth noting that to fix the problem, partial disassembly and removal of the front panel will be required. There are also interruptions in the operation of the central lock. It can spontaneously close the doors. The main reason is the jamming of the mechanism. The micro switch can also fail. On a run of 150–200,000 kilometers, the compressor clutch poly bearing fails. Over time, the comfort unit BCM body control module begins to bother with all sorts of glitches. Since non-replaceable relays are used in the block, there is only one solution to the problem: replacing the block to a 300 CU, although this will not be easy to do because of the clever bolting with spacers. On cars of the first years of production, contacts can rot. The presence of problems with contacts leads to incorrect operation of many sensors, fuel level, temperature, etc. In regular speakers, the diffuser falls off over time and the speakers begin to wheeze. The first generation Kia Cerato, despite its middle age, is a rather interesting offer in the secondary market, especially if the budget for buying a car is small. This model, although it has established itself as a reliable car, when buying it, you need to be prepared for problems caused by age and excessive mileage. The main advantage of this car over competitors is the lower cost of maintenance and repair. If you are the owner of this car model, please describe the problems that you had to face during the operation of the car. Perhaps it is your review that will help readers of our site when choosing a car.